Hi, welcome to another vinyl thing. Today I'm going to be looking at the discography of one of my all-time favourite bands and possibly one of the best bands to come out of this fair country. I'm talking about Radiohead, and I'm going to be looking at all 9 studio albums that they've brought out so far and trying my best to rank them into some sort of order of my least favourite to my favourite. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a look through one of the most interesting discographies of any British band. Starting us off at number 9. In at last place, and probably surprising nobody, we have 2011's King of Limbs. Albums like Kid A really pushed Radiohead to new limits of what they could be as a band. They used the studio as a fascinating instrument and totally changed the rulebook for themselves and their contemporaries. By the time they got to King of Limbs, however, this desire to experiment and push their boundaries overpowers the strength of the songs themselves. For possibly the first time in their career, the process overshadows the intent, and we're left with less of an engaging experience as a result. The band riffs on stunted loop after stunted loop without the necessary structure needed to make the songs as memorable as they could have been. That said, there's no such thing as a bad Radiohead album, and there are still many strong moments here, such as the brilliant Lotus Flower, Codex, or Give Up the Ghost. But overall, King of Limbs isn't as monumental to me as other albums that came before it. Just missing out on the bottom spot, we have in at number 8. Next up, it's Amnesiac from 2001. Whilst the band did everything to convince their fans that Amnesiac wasn't a collection of cast-offs from the Kid A sessions and was a fully self-contained album in itself, the proximity it has to its all-too-recent predecessor made it difficult for fans not to compare it, and for the most part, unfavourably so. For whilst Amnesiac isn't a bad album, and certainly has its share of standout moments, such as Pyramid Song, which is arguably one of Radiohead's best songs, it can't help but be eclipsed by the sheer brilliance of Kid A. The ideas and the songs are interesting, they're just not on a par, and it's almost impossible to separate them or judge Amnesiac on its own merits. In at number 7. Hail to the Thief, 2003. The band find their guitars again after the electronic experiments of Kid A and Amnesiac. Although it's still an ambitious effort, Hail to the Thief failed to move me in quite the same way as what had come before or what was still to come from the band. It's good, if not great. Radiohead continues to push themselves onward, but seem unsure what direction they want to take on this one. Just missing out of the top 5, we have in at number 6. In Rainbows, 2007. In the early noughties, after the disappointment of Amnesiac, the unthinkable happened. Me and Radiohead broke up. It was an amicable split and I still loved them from afar, but other bands turned my head and we slowly drifted apart. I'd sometimes check in to see how they were doing, and many times I heard good things, but it wasn't until the last couple of years when I finally got back in touch with them properly and my love for them was rekindled. It's a shame really, because in the interim years I missed out on some really great albums like 2007's In Rainbows. This album shows the band finding their focus and upping their game again after 2003's not quite as good Hail to the Thief, and once again stepping up to the forefront of the music scene. Their newfound notoriety was helped in no small part by the controversy of the album's pricing. At the time, the band courted some attention from the press for a gimmick their management decided upon. Audience were to pay what they wanted for this new album. Whilst in some ways I like this idea of putting the price in the hands of the consumer, it was a double-edged sword for unsigned and struggling musicians like myself at the time. who couldn't possibly afford to say, "Here, take my work, time, effort and money and have it for whatever you like." My difficulty in accepting Radiohead's idea was that it unconsciously undervalued new music and made it seem a bit more throwaway to people who were previously prepared to invest in it. This perhaps turned me off the album a bit at the time, which again is a huge shame because it's a bit of a corker. Not in a Kid A or OK Computer kind of way, but it's the first album in 6 years to show that the old bunch of mavericks from Oxford still had a lot more to give. Now we're into the top 5, starting off with number 5. It's their debut, Pablo Honey, 1993. Pablo Honey, in touching distance of OK Computer, have you lost your mind? Would be the correct response to my placing of this album just a few spaces behind the zenith of the band's first decade. OK Computer is without a doubt the best album they had done up until this point, and many fans would argue it is the great Radiohead album. Whereas it could equally be argued that Radiohead had barely got off the starting blocks with Pablo Honey. However, as I pointed out at the beginning of this isn't just about what is the best, in inverted commas, Radiohead album. It's purely subjective account of which is my favourite album to return to again and again. I know I'll kick myself when I look back on this, but I know Pablo Honey hasn't aged too well. It's a band at the beginning of their journey, long before they showed their potential. So why is this one so high? One word, nostalgia. This is the album that first turned me on to the band. Although pretty generic by Radiohead standards, at the time when most people were trying to sound like either Blur or Nirvana, Radiohead's Pablo Honey was different. It combined the art noise of Sonic Youth with the interesting sounds of contemporaries like Suede. Tom York's voice completely blew me away too, a mixture of snarling cynicism and swirling, soaring emotion, the likes of which I'd never seen before. And whilst people love to berate this album, it actually has some really good songs on it. It's got You, Stop Whispering, and Ripcord, which all rock. You've got Thinking About You, which is beautiful, and Blowout shows early signs of a band that would go on to be as much about offering an emotional trip as it was about offering a chorus. Alright, I might be wrong on this, but I don't think Radiohead's first effort is worth the derision that it gets. I never quite understand the hate that this album gets, just because they would go on to do more interesting stuff musically. To me, it's still a great alt indie album, and was the first that got me obsessed with the band, as well as helping me to process my first awkward forays into teenage love and loss. So it'll always have a special place in my heart. Just missing out on the top 3, in at number 4. The Bends, 1995. The Bends sees the band growing out of their raw beginnings on Pablo Honey to establish themselves as one of the most thought-provoking, but also most popular alt-rockers on the circuit. Singles like Just, High and Dry and Street Spirit were stadium-filling anthems, but each song on the album was also a compelling excursion into what indie music could become. When compared to the timelessness of OK Computer, the Bends feels like more of a product of its time. But in this early musical incarnation of the band as a rock unit, the Bend just does just that. It rocks. But it's also showing early signs that the band could develop and progress with each album they brought out, and that they would always be a band worth listening to. Number 3. OK Computer, to me, is Radiohead's version of Queen's A Night at the Opera. Hear me out on this one. Before their 5th album, Queen were a well-respected but niche heavy rock band. On Night of the Opera, they gravitated to a whole different level, throwing the most complex and interesting ideas at each song as they could to create a magnificent piece of work. They essentially opened up the studio toolbox and showed everything they were capable of in one career-defining album. The same could be said for Radiohead with their most well-known, and rightly so, album, OK Computer. In one stroke, they moved from being an admittedly exciting indie rock band to a fully fledged experimental and genre-defining one. Their song Paranoid Android feels like a twisted Bohemian Rhapsody, managing to be both incredibly popular with listeners and critics alike, whilst racing through a dizzying array of styles and concepts in just over 6 minutes. Twice as long as a regular pop song, whilst never losing its pace or drive. It's also possibly their grandest sounding project to date. The production on OK Computer is big, but so is the emotional impact of the songs. The themes come off as a neurotic, unhinged commentary on pre-millennial angst and on an uncertain future ahead. Every time I listen to it, I find new things to love about OK Computer. Not bad for an album I've been listening to for over 20 years now. It's universally acclaimed by listeners and critics alike, and with good reason. Number 2. You've probably noticed that Kid A pops up in nearly every other album review that I've given here, and there's a reason for that. The genre-shattering collection of Electronic Avenues was a new benchmark for the band, a complete gear shift from everything they had done before, and a springboard to everything that they would do afterwards. In essence, it was the band pressing the reset button. They take incredible risks in reinventing themselves from the ground up, from the art rockers of the 1990s into completely untrod ground at the turn of the millennium. They move from being essentially a songs band to being a band that creates a completely new and alien landscape with each and every album they bring out. It was a sort of bravery and scope that hadn't been attempted by a mainstream band since the days of Pink Floyd nearly 30 years previous. Kid A manages to be both a complete departure for the band and, as luck would have it, a new lease of life that would give them plenty to elaborate on and explore further down the line. Kid A is an essential album for any music fan and a barometer for any band on what can be achieved with an album. Also, it's one of the most psychedelic and imaginative sounds of the noughties or synths. Which means a surprise entry for my favourite Radiohead album in at number 1. I realise A Moon-Shaped Pool is a strange choice for my favourite Radiohead album. It has little of what made Kid A or OK Computer such groundbreaking and iconic albums. It hasn't aged enough to have the added weight of nostalgia that elevates Pablo Honey or The Bends high on this list. But for me, the reason A Moon-Shaped Pool is my favourite Radiohead album is the overall feeling it gives me. The place it takes me, the healing it gives me. Radiohead are one of those bands who I've always listened to at the most difficult times in life. From teenage breakups to adult breakdowns, their songs have always helped me to understand and process my deepest feelings and fears. And A Moon-Shaped Pool is no exception, connecting with me at a time when I really did need it. It's probably the most gentle of Radiohead's albums, and yet it never bores or frustrates you. It challenges and lures you in with its layers of dreamlike instrumentation, whilst taking you off to the most ethereal and beautiful places inside your head. In short, it touches the parts other albums can't reach, and it's renewed my faith and love for this band who have fascinated me for over 25 years. So there we go. That was not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I hope you enjoyed that look through some of my favourite Radiohead albums. Of course, a bit of a disclaimer again, this is totally opinion. It's based on nothing more than what albums stuck with me emotionally. And there's an argument that any one of those albums is an absolute classic. So, like I said, get involved in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite Radiohead albums and songs are in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and do all those things that you do on YouTube. And join me again for another musical video in the future. Thanks for watching.